Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're gearing up for a data interview right now, you already know the feeling. Sweaty palms, a racing heart, and just the sheer dread of being handed some messy, chaotic spreadsheet and being asked to perform absolute magic right there on the spot. Honestly, it often feels like you're gearing up for the ultimate boss battle. But what if I told you that you could walk into that room not just prepared, but completely unstoppable? Today, we're going on a hero's journey through the world of spreadsheet mastery. We're going to distill the absolute essential, high-impact skills you need to answer those critical Excel interview questions like a true expert. And hey, this isn't about memorizing every single button on the ribbon. It's about mastering the core concepts that the top tech and data companies are actively testing for right now.
All right, so here's our roadmap for the journey ahead. We're going to hit 1. Essential data lookups. 2. Counting and summing. 3. IF logic functions. 4. The power of pivot tables. And finally, 5. Ensuring flawless data quality. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. Mastering essential data lookups. Finding the data you need. Okay, so here's usually your very first major hurdle in any data interview. You're handed a massive worksheet and you need to extract very specific pieces of data without completely breaking your formulas in the process. So let's look at the classic showdown. For years, VLOOKUP has been the most famous function in the business, but it has a huge flaw. It's actually incredibly fragile. See, VLOOKUP only searches the very first column of your selected range and then returns a value to the right. It is strictly a left-to-right operation. Worse than that, if someone decides to insert or delete a column in your sheet, your VLOOKUP just breaks entirely because it relies on a hard-coded column index number. And that is exactly why interviewers love to ask you about index match. Index match is a much safer, vastly more stable upgrade. By using match to find the row position and index to return the value, it works left or right, and it stays totally stable even when your columns shift all over the place. A perfect real-world use case for this is pulling an employee's salary from a massive HR sheet using only their employee ID, no matter where those columns happen to live.
Now, if index match is the stable professional, XLOOKUP is the modern, unbreakable replacement. XLOOKUP solves literally all the problems of the legacy VLOOKUP function. It searches left to right, it can return full arrays instead of just single values, and this is crucial. It defaults to a safe, exact match. VLOOKUP, on the other hand, defaults to an approximate match, which can cause some pretty disastrous data errors if you aren't paying attention. Plus, XLOOKUP actually has a built-in not found argument, so you don't even have to wrap your formula in complex error handling. So if you're matching product codes to prices and you want to ensure a super clean result, even if a product code is entirely missing, XLOOKUP is exactly the function you want to bring up in your interview.
Real quick, before we leave formulas entirely, we have to review the fundamental building block that makes all these lookups work without collapsing, and that's cell references. When you copy a formula down a row, a relative reference like A1 changes automatically. An absolute reference like $A, $1 stays completely fixed in place. And a mixed reference locks only the row or only the column. So if your interviewer asks you to multiply an entire column of fluctuating sales values by one single fixed tax rate located in cell B1, you absolutely must use an absolute reference for that tax rate. Otherwise, your formula is going to break the second you drag it down.
Moving on to Section 2. Counting and summing like pros. Aggregating your data. So once you can actually find your data, your next big test is aggregating it to find high-level insights. And you don't just have one single way to count in a spreadsheet. The standard count function, that's strictly for cells containing numeric values. If a cell has text, it gets totally ignored. Count A, on the other hand, counts all non-empty cells, whether they hold numbers, text, or even errors. But the real interview test comes in with conditional counting. Count if lets you count based on one specific condition. But count ifs with an S at the end allows for complex multi-condition filtering using strict AND logic. For instance, if you need to count the number of orders that have a status of delivered and are specifically from the city of Mumbai, count ifs is the exact tool you need for the job.
The really crucial takeaway here is understanding the difference between singular and plural functions. Because just like with counting, we have some if and some ifs. Some if sums up values based on one single condition. But some ifs is the heavy hitter. It sums values based on multiple conditions using that same strict AND logic. Imagine an interview scenario where a manager comes to you and needs to know the total sales, but only for the electronics category and only for the year 2024. Because you have two totally distinct conditions that must both be met, some ifs is really the only correct answer.
Section 3. Understanding IF logic functions. Making your data smart.
All right, this is where it gets really fun. This is where we stop just retrieving data and start making the spreadsheet do the heavy logical decision-making for us. We start with the basic I function. It just checks a condition and gives you one value if it's true and another if it's false. But let's be real, the real world is rarely just true or false. And that leads us to step 2, nested ifs, where you chain multiple conditions together. But honestly, nested ifs can become incredibly messy and super hard to read. That is exactly why you want to impress your interviewer with step 3, the ifs function. IFs evaluates multiple conditions sequentially, and it completely prevents that massive headache of deep nesting. Think about if you're asked to grade students on a scale, assigning an A if the score is over 90, a B if it's over 75, and a C for anything else. The IFs function handles that beautifully and cleanly. And hey, if you're comparing one specific value against a hard-coded list of matches, you can actually take it a step further with the switch function.
Section 4. The power of pivot tables, high-level summarization. Listen, if formulas are the scalpel of data analysis, pivot tables, they are the heavy machinery. They are the ultimate time saver. A pivot table is a built-in feature that summarizes massive data sets by grouping, aggregating, and filtering data. And the absolute magic of pivot tables is that you can do all of this without writing a single, solitary formula. Just think about it. You could be staring at 50,000 rows of raw, unformatted data. By throwing it into a pivot table, you can summarize monthly sales by region and product category in a matter of seconds. It immediately shows interviewers that you value efficiency and you know exactly how to look at the big picture.
And the process itself is incredibly straightforward. With just a few clicks, you go to Insert, select Pivot Table, and then it is literally just a drag-and-drop exercise. You drag your region field down to the rows area, maybe drop month into the columns area, and drag your sales field to the values area to aggregate them. Just like that, instantly, you've got a dynamic, fully formatted summary table that would have taken you hours to build using standard formulas.
Section 5. Ensuring flawless data quality, protecting your formulas.
You know, you can build the absolute most elegant formulas in the world, but it all completely falls apart if your underlying data is just garbage. So how do you prevent bad data entry in the first place? Think about it. If you build a pristine dashboard, what happens when a coworker decides to spell approved with 3 Ps, or casually types a word into a strict number field? Your formulas break, and your pivot tables start double counting items. This right here is the final defense mechanism in our spreadsheet toolkit, and interviewers absolutely want to know that you are thinking deeply about data integrity.
The answer to that is data validation. Data validation is a built-in feature that actually restricts what a user can enter into a specific cell. And the most common and probably most useful application of this is creating drop-down lists. For example, if you have a status column, you can use data validation to ensure that the user can only select pending, approved, or rejected from a predefined list. They physically cannot type in a typo. By controlling the input, you guarantee the output, which protects every single formula and pivot table you have running downstream.
As we wrap up today, I want to leave you with this fantastic quote straight from our source material. Practice these concepts hands-on. Confidence in Excel comes from doing, not just memorizing. We have covered a massive amount of ground today. We started with rock-solid lookups like index match and XLOOKUP. We explored multi-condition aggregation with countifs and sumifs. We made our data super smart with sequential IF logic. We summarized 50,000 rows in seconds with pivot tables, and we completely locked down our data quality using data validation. But listen, knowing the theory just isn't enough. You have to get into a spreadsheet and get your hands dirty.
So here is my final thought for you. You now know exactly what the top companies are actively looking for. You have the roadmap. Which Excel superpower are you going to master first for your next interview? Don't just sit there and think about it. Open up a blank workbook right now, throw in some dummy data, and start experimenting. Until next time, keep practicing and go totally own that interview.